The wind came low across the desert, dragging its fingers through the pale grass and whispering secrets only the rocks remembered. Elias McGraw sat on the creaking porch of his ranch house, boots scuffed, hat pulled low, the brim shadowing eyes the color of sun-bleached denim. He rocked slowly, the rhythm more out of habit than comfort, and watched the horizon for nothing in particular. The New Mexico sun was merciless that summer, the kind of heat that didn't just burn, it stripped. It peeled away time and memory and skin, leaving only what a man truly was underneath. For Elias, that meant silence, and more silence. He had grown into it like a scar, worn it like a second skin. Around him stretched miles of open land, barren, cracked, and perfect in its stillness. His ranch, once filled with the bustle of cattle and hired hands, now bore the loneliness of its keeper. The barn leaned to one side like a tired sentinel, the fields gone to seed, and the corral empty, but for an old swayback gelding named Boone. The horse stood near the trough, tail flicking lazily at invisible flies, ears occasionally twitching at sounds Elias could no longer hear from the porch. Boone was old, maybe older than Elias could say for sure. He'd been a wedding gift, or maybe bought after. Elias couldn't remember anymore, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that Boone stayed. And in a world where people left, where time took everyone and everything, Boone was still there. Elias's fingers moved slowly along the smooth grain of his rocking chair's arm. He could hear the groan of old wood beneath him. It was the only thing that ever spoke to him these days, aside from the wind. The house behind him remained just as quiet, each room like a time capsule. The smell of cedar, sweat, and tobacco clung to the air inside. He hadn't changed a damn thing since she died. Mary had been the quiet type, too, at least until the wind kicked up. Then she sang. Always on windy days. She said it carried her voice across the land, like a prayer to the mountains. She would hum while cooking beans over the stove or brushing the hair of their daughter, Clara. She'd laugh when Elias teased her about serenading the jackrabbits. Clara, that name could still cut him deep. He could still picture her on the swing he built beside the cottonwood tree. Barefoot, curls wild, voice like birdsong. She'd fallen sick one summer. Just a fever at first. Nothing unusual. But it stayed, turned her pale and soft like ash. And no matter what the doctor brought out from town, it didn't change a thing. She died before her 8th birthday. Mary followed 2 winters later, chest full of sadness and lungs full of sickness, like her heart just couldn't keep fighting what was already gone. Elias never remarried. He never even tried. The house, the land, and Boone, that was what was left, and it was enough. Or so he told himself. Most days he worked just enough to keep the place from falling down. He'd rise before the sun, take a slow walk of the perimeter, feed Boone, draw water from the well, patch the fence posts where the coyotes dug through. Lunch was beans or jerky. Supper was whatever he could heat on the stove without lighting the whole damn place on fire. And every day ended on that porch, rocking with the sun as it fell behind the red hills. On this day, the heat was heavier than usual. It pressed on the back of his neck like a warning, or a dare. Boone snorted once, low and uncertain, and Elias glanced at him. The horse was looking toward the ravine. That dry cut of land had been a creek a lifetime ago, but now it was just broken earth and thorns. Nothing grew there, nothing lived there. At least, nothing was supposed to. Elias stood slowly, joints cracking like old knuckles, and grabbed the canteen hanging by the door. He slung it over his shoulder, checked that his revolver was still snug in the worn leather holster on his hip, not because he expected trouble, but because that's what the land demanded, and stepped down from the porch. He walked with a slow, purposeful stride, boots crunching over dry soil, the air so hot it shimmered. Boone followed at a distance, a loyal ghost in the desert light. The ravine wasn't far, maybe a quarter mile, but the heat, stretched time, made the walk feel like forever. As he approached, Elias noticed the buzzards circling above. Not many, just 2 or 3, but enough to make his skin tighten. He stepped down the bank, boot heels skidding slightly on loose dirt, and then he heard it. A sound. Small. Strangled. Not wind, not animal. A groan. He froze, breath held. Eyes scanned the shadows under a crooked mesquite. That's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a bundle of cloth, or maybe an animal that had died in the shade. But then it moved. A hand twitched. And then he saw her face. She was young, no more than 13 or 14, and covered in dust. Her long black hair was matted, skin burned red from the sun, and her clothes were torn at the seams. An arrow stuck from her thigh, clean through the muscle, the shaft broken as if she had tried to crawl. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow. Elias stood over her, uncertain. The old stories rose up in him like smoke. Apache, his grandfather, had told tales of raids, of stolen horses and burned wagons. The town still spoke of skirmishes, ambushes in the hills, arrows flying from the dark like ghosts. Elias had known men who never came back from hunting trips, just found with throats cut or scalps gone. But this wasn't a warrior. This was a girl. Barely more than a child. She opened her eyes for a moment. Brown, dark as soil after rain. They looked straight into his. Fearful, defiant, pleading. He looked around quickly. No tracks. No signs of battle. Just her. "God damn," he muttered under his breath. He knelt beside her. The heat from her skin was alarming. Fever. Infection was already setting in. She made a noise when he touched her arm. More instinct than consent. But she didn't pull away. "This is gonna hurt," Elias said, though he knew she didn't understand a word. Carefully, he looped her arm around his shoulder, bracing her weight with both arms. She was lighter than she looked. Bones and dust. Boone snorted from the ridge above. "Easy now," Elias said to the horse as he climbed the bank. "We've got a guest." He tied the canteen to his belt and hauled her up onto Boone's back as gently as he could, then climbed up behind her, holding her upright. She sagged against him, unconscious again. Her skin was hot even through his shirt. The ride back was slow, the air dry as bone. Flies began to gather near the wound. Elias swatted them away, jaw clenched. By the time they reached the porch, the sun had started to drop behind the hills. Shadows stretched long across the land. Elias dismounted, cradling the girl in his arms, and carried her into the house. Dust followed them in, like it was unsure whether to settle or wait. He laid her on the old cot in the corner, Clara's cot. He stood still for a moment, hand resting on the post, memories flooding in. Then he shook them off and got to work. He lit the stove, boiled water, found what was left of the old medicine kit Mary had kept. The labels faded, but the bottles still sealed. Whiskey, bandages, scissors. He hesitated with the arrow. Removing it might kill her. Leaving it in would definitely kill her. He cleaned his knife, said a silent prayer. "You're not dying in my house," he muttered and cut. The girl screamed once, sharp and short, then passed out again. He cleaned the wound, packed it with boiled rags and herbs he couldn't name. Then he poured a little whiskey into her mouth and wiped her forehead with a damp cloth. Night fell. The stars came out like broken glass scattered across a black tablecloth. Elias sat beside the cot, watching her chest rise and fall. His bones ached. His eyes burned. She was still alive. Outside, the coyotes howled. Inside, the silence was different now, no longer empty, no longer still. Something had changed. He didn't know her name. Didn't know who had hurt her or why. But she was here. And so long as she was, he would keep her safe. The land didn't forgive. But maybe people could. Elias leaned back, hand resting on the cot's wooden edge. Boone whinnied softly outside. The desert waited. And far, far in the distance, beyond the hills, beyond the stars, hooves stirred. The girl did not wake, not through the long night, nor when the coyotes called from beyond the hills, nor when the floorboards groaned beneath Elias's boots as he paced, restless and uncertain. She lay on Clara's old cot, her body swallowed in faded patchwork quilts, her face pale beneath the red dust caked on her cheeks. The wound in her leg had stopped bleeding, but her skin burned hot and dry, her breath thin and fast. Elias sat beside her, watching, waiting. Boone paced outside the window, his hooves clicking slow circles in the dirt, like even he knew something wasn't right. Elias hadn't tended a wound like that in years, not since the war. He had pulled arrows from men before, had seen the damage they could do. But this was different. This was a child, and this wasn't a battlefield. This was his home. The same walls that had once echoed with Clara's laughter now soaked up the girl's fevered moans. And there was no doctor coming. Not out here. The town was 2 days' ride east, and Elias didn't know if she had 2 days left. He rubbed his hands together, not because he was cold, but because they were shaking. When was the last time he'd cared this much if someone lived or died? Maybe not since Mary, maybe not since Clara. He pushed the thought aside and got to his feet, moving through the house in the dark, guided by instinct and memory. He fetched the jar of river clay Mary used to swear by, mixed it with hot water and herbs, and returned to kneel beside the cot again. He dabbed the girl's forehead with a wet rag, whispering nonsense under his breath like a prayer to keep his own mind steady. Her eyelids fluttered. He leaned closer. "You hear me, girl?" he murmured. "You hang on, you stubborn little thing." No answer. Just the fever. He pulled back the quilt, checking the bandage on her thigh. The skin around it was swollen and red, but there was no fresh bleeding. He'd done what he could. Now it was up to her. By dawn, Elias had dozed off in the old rocking chair, arms folded tight, head slumped forward. He woke with a grunt, blinking at the pale morning light seeping through the curtains. He stood slowly, bones cracking and stretched. His joints screamed from sleeping in a chair. He poured the last of the water into a cup and knelt to press it against her lips. Her eyes opened, just a sliver, but enough. "Drink," he said gently. She didn't understand the word, but her lips parted. He tipped the cup and watched the water slide down her throat. Her hand trembled against his. When she finished, her gaze locked on him. There was no fear now, only exhaustion and confusion. She muttered something in Apache, a whisper he didn't catch. Elias nodded, unsure what else to do. He set the cup down and stood, looking down at her with eyes that hadn't held softness in years. She was still burning up, but her eyes had opened. That meant something. The day passed in stillness, broken only by the creak of the windmill and the occasional sigh from the cot. Elias moved through the house like a ghost, keeping the fire low, boiling more water, checking the wound. At midday, he stepped out onto the porch to check the horizon. Nothing but dust and heat. He pulled a tin of beans from the shelf and dumped them into the pot. The fire hissed. The girl stirred again, coughing weakly. He brought her another cup of water, this time mixed with a splash of whiskey to fight the fever. She winced at the burn but swallowed. As the afternoon faded, the shadows inside the house stretched long and gold. The girl managed to sit up briefly, propped against the wall, her eyes darting around the room like a bird trapped in a box. She looked toward the window, toward the door, toward the saddle hanging on the wall. She muttered something again, but Elias didn't understand. "Don't try to move too much," he said. "You'll tear it open." She frowned, lips tightening, but stayed still. He noticed her hands trembling, not just from weakness, but from something deeper. Fear, maybe. Or memory. He handed her a piece of dry cornbread, softened in water. She took it slowly, staring at him all the while. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said quietly. "You're safe here. Understand?" No answer. Just the sound of her chewing, slow and cautious. Night came fast. The desert cooled. The wind changed direction. Elias shut the windows and checked the lock on the door. more out of habit than worry. Still, something gnawed at him, a feeling like he was being watched. Boone was uneasy again, pacing near the barn. Elias kept a rifle leaning in the corner, though he hoped to hell he wouldn't need it. The girl slept through most of the night, only waking once to drink. Elias stayed close, sleeping in short bursts, always with one ear turned toward her breathing. By morning, the fever had broken. He knew it the moment he touched her forehead. Her skin was damp but no longer burning. Her breath had steadied. Her eyes opened wider, clearer now. She looked at him without flinching. "You're tougher than you look," Elias muttered. She blinked slowly, then said something softly. "A name, maybe. Or a place." Elias sat back, rubbing the stubble on his chin. "I don't speak Apache," he admitted. She tilted her head, just slightly, then repeated the word. He pointed to himself. "Elias." She said nothing. He pointed again. "Ilias." After a pause, she murmured something that sounded close. He nodded. "That's good enough." He pointed to her, eyebrows raised. She hesitated, then said, "Naline." He repeated it. She nodded. The house felt different after that. The silence wasn't as heavy. Elias moved around the kitchen with a little more energy, boiling coffee, frying what little salt pork he had left. Naline watched him from the cot, propped on pillows, her legs stiff but her eyes bright. When he brought her a plate, she ate without hesitation. Each day, she grew stronger. By the third day, she could sit up for hours. By the fourth, she asked to go outside, though Elias made her wait. He helped her to the porch on the fifth day, letting her sit in the shade while Boone stood nearby, curious and gentle. She reached out to the horse. Boone sniffed her hand, then nudged her shoulder. "Good taste," Elias said, sipping his coffee. She glanced at him, almost smiling. In the evenings, Elias would light the lantern and sit with her in the quiet. Sometimes she would speak, soft and slow, telling him things he couldn't understand. Names, places. He listened anyway. He answered with his own stories, half for her, half for himself. Stories of Mary and Clara, of summers when the creek still ran full, of times when the house had more than just wind and memory inside it. One night, she pointed to the stars. "Chidi," she whispered. Elias looked up. "Bad spirits?" he asked. She nodded. "They don't come here," he said. She didn't answer, but she seemed to believe him. Later, as she slept, Elias sat alone on the porch, the rifle across his lap. The stars hung low and bright. Boone stood near the corral, ears twitching. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Elias narrowed his eyes. Something was out there. He could feel it. The next morning, he found fresh tracks by the ravine. Hoof prints. Several. Recent. He followed them for a few hundred yards, then stopped. He didn't need to go further. They were being watched. He said nothing to Naline, but he checked his revolver more often. He tied Boone closer to the house. He left extra water near the back door, just in case they needed to leave in a hurry. On the seventh day, Naline stood on her own, using a stick for support. She walked the length of the porch and back, teeth clenched in pain but determined. "You're stubborn," Elias said. She smirked. That night, he dreamed of flames, of war cries, of Clara standing by the cottonwood tree, her voice lost in the wind. He woke in a sweat, rifle in hand, heart pounding. The silence was too perfect. He stepped outside, barefoot, the ground cool beneath his feet. In the distance, beyond the ridge, he saw them. Shapes. Dozens of them. Horses. Riders. Still as statues. Watching. He didn't move. Neither did they. And then, as the first edge of dawn touched the sky, they turned as one and vanished into the desert like mist. Elias stood there long after they were gone, the rifle heavy in his hands. Naline appeared behind him, leaning on the doorframe. She said something in a whisper. He turned to her. She was pale, eyes wide. "They've come," he said. She nodded. The sun had not yet lifted its head from behind the Red Canyon wall when the ground began to hum. It was a subtle thing at first, like the heartbeat of the land itself. But Elias felt it in his boots as he stood by the well, a bucket half lowered in his grip. Boone raised his head from the trough, ears standing straight, nostrils flaring. Then the bucket jerked as Elias let it fall and turned toward the ridge. The horses came like a tide. Dozens of them, maybe more. Dust rose behind them in great plumes, golden and blinding against the early light. Riders cut through the haze like ghosts, silent, unwavering, bearing long spears and painted shields. They didn't gallop. They approached slowly, steadily, with the weight of something older than time pressing into the earth with each hoofbeat. Elias didn't move. He counted 10 riders in the front line alone, all broad-shouldered and straight-backed, with braided hair and eyes like the mountain night. Behind them, the formation stretched wide and deep, riders in rows, some bearing bows across their backs, others with the hard-set silence of hunters. The paint on their faces glistened with sweat and dust. Not one of them spoke. Inside the house, Nalin stood frozen at the window, one hand gripping the edge of the frame, her mouth parted in breathless stillness. She looked toward Elias, then back to the riders, her face unreadable. Elias turned from the well and walked back toward the porch, not fast, not slow. He kept his hands visible. His revolver hung in its holster, untouched. The air was tight with tension, the kind that could shatter with a single misstep. He climbed the steps to the porch and stood there, arms at his sides, watching as the riders came to a stop 50 yards from the house. The lead warrior rode a jet-black stallion. He wore a red headband and a long necklace made of bone and turquoise that gleamed beneath the morning sun. His face bore 2 thick lines of white paint, one across his brow, one across his jaw. He did not dismount. He simply sat, studying Elias with eyes that revealed nothing. For a long time, no one moved. Even the wind had gone quiet. Elias cleared his throat and spoke, though his voice was dry and unsure. "She's alive," he said. "The girl." No response. "She's inside. Hurt, but she's mending." Still nothing. Elias took one slow step forward. Boone snorted behind him. "I didn't mean her harm," he said. "She was dying out there. Couldn't leave her." The warrior's gaze shifted to the house, to the window where Nalin stood, then back to Elias. His hand moved at last, raising in signal. 3 riders broke from the formation and rode forward. As they approached, Elias saw that one of them was a woman, her expression fierce and searching. She was older than Nalin, but bore a strong resemblance. The lead warrior finally dismounted and followed the 3 toward the porch. The way he walked said everything. This was no ordinary warrior. This was someone of rank, of blood and history. His feet carried authority. His silence was louder than any battle cry. He stopped, just in front of the porch steps. Elias met his eyes and waited. Nalin pushed open the front door. The moment her bare feet touched the wood, all eyes turned to her. She stepped forward slowly, using the doorframe for balance. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. She looked at the woman first, and something passed between them, something too layered for words. Then she looked at the man. "Taza," she said. The man stepped forward. For a heartbeat, he looked as though he might embrace her. Instead, he raised a hand and placed it gently on her shoulder. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of mountains. Nalin lowered her head, her voice trembling. "Elias," she said, gesturing toward the old man beside her. The Apache leader turned back to Elias. His eyes had changed, not softened, but shifted, like a storm pausing to listen. Elias nodded. "I did what I could," he said. "She was in a bad way. I didn't know who she was. Didn't matter." The silence returned. Then, in one smooth motion, the warrior extended his arm, offering his forearm, palm turned down. Elias looked at it, understood the meaning. He stepped forward and clasped it. The circle around the ranch seemed to exhale. Spears lowered slightly. Riders sat taller. Dust settled. Taza said something in Apache. The woman replied quickly, eyes flicking toward the girl. Then Taza turned to his riders and gave a sharp signal. One by one, They dismounted and moved toward the edge of the property, forming a loose semicircle, setting down their weapons, beginning the rituals of camp. Elias blinked. The tension in his chest began to loosen. He looked to Nalin, who had sunk back into the chair on the porch, her legs still stiff. She gave him the smallest of nods. That evening, the world around the ranch transformed. Tents rose beneath the cottonwoods. Fires crackled in small rings of stone. Children darted between cooking pots and spears, barefoot and laughing. Old women pounded maize, their arms strong, their songs drifting into the air like old memories. Elias moved carefully through it all, unsure of his place, but not unwelcome. He fetched water from the well and carried it to the edge of camp. No one stopped him. A young boy took the bucket with a quiet thank you in his eyes. Nalin remained on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She watched the firelight dance across the yard, as if seeing a dream come alive. At dusk, Teza approached with a bundle wrapped in deerskin. He knelt before Elias by the fire and unfolded it carefully. Inside lay a single object, a hand-woven blanket, rich with color and design. Symbols etched into the threads told stories Elias couldn't read, but he knew what it meant. Teza placed it in Elias's hands, then tapped his chest once. Respect, the woman from earlier translated, stepping beside them. Elias looked at the blanket, then at the faces around him. The fire cracked softly. Nilin watched with a quiet intensity. "I don't know what I did to earn this," he said, voice low. The woman tilted her head. "You saw a child," she said, "not an enemy." The blanket was warm. He folded it over his knees as he sat by the fire that night, listening to songs sung in a language older than the desert. Flutes echoed through the sagebrush. Drums rolled like distant thunder. The stars overhead burned brighter than he remembered. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. The peace was too fragile, too rare. He watched Boone doze by the barn. He watched Nalin sleep on the porch curled against the post. He watched the fires burn low and the shadows stretch long, as if the land itself was finally willing to rest. When morning came, the camp was already alive. Smoke curled from cook fires. Riders saddled their horses. Children gathered wild herbs under the watchful eyes of elders. Teza approached one last time. His horse was saddled. Nalin stood beside him now, dressed in fresh clothes, a woven belt tied at her waist. She turned to Elias, eyes shining. She spoke one word in Apache, then repeated it in broken English. "Thank." Elias smiled, the kind that didn't need words. Teza mounted his horse and gave Elias one final look, not of farewell, but of understanding. Then he turned, gave the signal, and the tribe began to move, horses lifting dust into the golden morning. Elias stood alone again on the porch, the blanket still folded in his arms. But the silence was different now. It was not empty. It was sacred. The fire circle remained long after the tribe had gone. The stones blackened, the ashes soft and cool beneath the toe of Elias's boot. He stood over it in the early dawn light, arms folded, staring at the spot where songs had filled the night just days before. The silence now was not the same silence as before. It had weight. It remembered. The windmill groaned as it turned, the old blades creaking like bones. Elias walked the edge of the property, the same way he always had, but the land no longer felt like it belonged only to him. He paused now and then, squatting beside a track in the dirt, a scuffed heel mark where a child had danced, a strand of beadwork caught on a fence post. Their presence had been brief, but something permanent had been planted in the soil. Boone followed behind him lazily, swatting at flies with his tail. His gait had slowed even more these last days. The horse had seen a lot, but even he had been unsettled by the sudden arrival, and more so by the quiet after. Elias finished his walk and turned back toward the house. The front porch sat empty in the golden light, but the blanket Teza had given him was still draped over the railing, catching the breeze like a banner. The reds and ochres of its weave shifted slightly with each gust. He left it there. He liked seeing it, as if it told anyone passing through that the land here was no longer hostile. Nalin hadn't come back. He hadn't expected her to. Not really, but part of him looked to the horizon each morning, just in case. She belonged with her people, but her absence was felt in the house like the shadow of a storm cloud that had passed and never returned. He caught himself talking out loud sometimes, answering questions she hadn't asked, leaving out water and small pieces of bread by the hearth just in case she appeared again, barefoot and tired, like before. Days passed. Then, a week. The land grew hotter. The grass turned to brittle straw. The ravine filled with the sound of crickets and nothing more. Then came the trader. Elias heard the horse long before he saw the man. He stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, as the dust settled on the trail. The rider wore a battered hat and a coat too heavy for the heat, his mustache stained from tobacco. A mule followed behind him, saddlebags stuffed with cloth and goods. "Morning," the man called out. "Morning," Elias replied. The trader dismounted with a grunt, stretched his back and tipped his hat. "Heard tell there was a white man out this way who broke bread with the Apache. Figured I'd see if he needed anything." Elias narrowed his eyes slightly. "You get that story from town?" "Word spreads fast when it rides on surprise," the man said, smiling. "Folks say you saved one of their young. Some say you took her in. Some say you joined them." "I fed a child who was dying," Elias said flatly. "That's all." The trader nodded. "That's more than most would have done." He pulled open one saddlebag and began to unload jars of beans, rolls of tobacco, cloth, nails. Elias watched him work, unsure how he felt about the man's casual air. "Don't worry," the trader added. "I don't come to stir trouble, just to trade, maybe hear a story or two." Elias said nothing, then turned and walked into the house. He came back with a small pouch of coins, a bundle of rabbit pelts, and a hand-carved pipe. They traded in silence. Later, as the man packed up, he paused beside the fire circle. He gestured toward the stones. "They left this?" "Built it." The trader looked around. "Strange days. World's changing out here. Not sure if it's for the better or worse." Elias didn't respond. The trader mounted his horse, nodded, and disappeared down the trail in a cloud of dust. That night, Elias sat by the fire alone, the blanket pulled over his shoulders. The stars watched in silence. The coyotes kept their distance. He didn't dream often. But that night, the images came fast and vivid. He saw Nalin, standing in the doorway, her face half in shadow. He saw Mary, singing softly near the stove. He saw Clara laughing by the cottonwood tree, her swing moving with no wind to push it. Then he saw the Apache riders again, only they weren't distant now. They were standing at the edge of his porch, weapons lowered, faces marked with grief. He woke with a start, the fire low, Boone stirring restlessly outside. The air smelled of something unfamiliar, smoke, not from his fire, from the east. He grabbed the rifle. It was still dark when he saddled Boone and rode out toward the ridge. The sky was lit faintly with a strange glow. It wasn't a wildfire, too controlled. When he crested the ridge, he saw the flames. A wagon had been burned, a small camp destroyed, tents torn, ashes floating through the dawn light like snowflakes, scattered arrows, blood on the stones, no bodies. He dismounted and stepped carefully through the ruins, checking for signs of life. He found a child's doll, half burned, a woman's shawl, torn, a necklace made of turquoise beads. His stomach turned. These were Nalin's people. He searched the tracks, horses, many of them, different kinds, heavy hooves, soldiers maybe, or worse. He returned to the ranch in silence, jaw set, heart heavy. He didn't sleep that night. He left the fire burning until dawn, as if to light a way home. The next day, he waited. And on the second day, they returned. But not like before. Only 7 riders now, tired, wounded, dirty. Among them, Taza. His arm was wrapped in bloodied cloth. His face was drawn with exhaustion and rage, and behind him, riding a smaller horse, was Nalan. She slid off the saddle before the horse had stopped. Her feet hit the dirt and carried her straight to Elias without hesitation. He caught her as she nearly collapsed in his arms. "They came," she said, voice hoarse. "Many." Taza dismounted with difficulty. He said nothing, only looked at Elias, then at the fire circle. His expression held the weight of failure. They had been attacked, scattered, and now returned to the one place they believed was safe. Elias nodded slowly. "You can stay." Taza bowed his head. The others set about building camp again, but there was no singing this time, no dancing, just silence and pain. Elias helped dress the wounds. He boiled water, laid out cloth, cleaned broken skin. Nalan never cried. She sat by the fire with a blank stare, hands in her lap, her eyes lost in memories. Later that evening, Taza joined Elias on the porch. "We are hunted," he said. Elias nodded. "They think we are animals," Taza continued. "They burn what they fear." "Not all of us are like that," Elias said, "but too many are." They sat in silence. Elias looked out over the camp. "I've got land," he said. "Plenty of it. You want to stay? Build here. You can." Taza turned to him. "Why?" Elias looked toward the dark horizon. "Because I've buried enough people to know when the living are worth saving." Taza said nothing for a long time. Then he placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "We will not forget." That night, they rebuilt the fire circle. They lit it higher than before. And for the first time in weeks, someone sang. They stayed through the full turn of the moon, and when the rains came, brief and cold and sharp like silver needles against the dust, the earth drank it slowly and without joy. Elias had never known his ranch to hold so many people for so long. The nights were filled with quiet repairs, the sharpening of blades, the weaving of fresh cloth, and the repairing of broken saddles. No one laughed much. They spoke in hushed tones. Their eyes often scanned the horizon, even when the sky offered nothing but empty space. A wound had been cut into their lives, and though it had scabbed, it had not healed. The fire circle burned again, but never quite as bright as before. There were fewer songs now. Nalan moved slowly between the tents, her limp more visible than it had been. But there was strength in her. She carried water. She helped bind the wounds of a man who'd been slashed down the back. She climbed the ladder to Elias's hayloft and sat watching the sunset without speaking a word. She had become older in a way that had nothing to do with years. Elias kept to his work. He repaired the fence near the north ridge, patched holes in the barn roof where rain had crept in. But now, when he walked the perimeter in the morning, others walked with him, two warriors who spoke little, but whose presence he'd come to accept like the sound of his boots in the dirt. Sometimes they exchanged nods, sometimes silence. It was enough. The land began to shift in subtle ways. A new cooking pit was dug behind the house, lined with river stones brought from miles away. Children strung colorful bits of cloth between the posts of the porch, decorations that fluttered like whispers. Boone was brushed and fed by gentle hands not Elias's own, and though the old horse looked confused at first, he did not complain. He'd seen enough winters to know when to let the world move around him. One morning, Elias found a small bundle of herbs tied with twine left at his door. He didn't know who had placed it there, but when he tucked it into the cupboard beside Mary's old spice jars, it felt right. The tension that once clung to every step had loosened. There was still fear, but it had changed shape. Less sharp, more a distant ache, the kind that comes after a hard fight or a long night of bad dreams. But peace, like rain in the desert, never stays long. They arrived just after noon on a day that began too still. Elias had risen early to find the wind had vanished. The sky was pale and flat, the kind of colorless light that made everything seem thinner, more fragile. He felt it first in his bones. Boone stomped at nothing. The dogs barked, then silenced. And then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Not many, not like before. This was no tribal procession. This was thunder with spurs and dust and war beneath it. Elias stepped off the porch, shotgun in hand. The riders crested the eastern ridge like a wave of steel. 5 of them. Cavalry or something close. Not in full uniform, but wearing blue jackets, wide-brimmed hats, rifles slung across their backs. Their horses were tired but fast, their eyes scanning the land like hawks. They saw the tents, the fires, the children. They pulled up short near the edge of the camp. Dust curled around their boots as they dismounted. The man in front wore a mustache like a wire brush and a leather strap across his chest. His hand rested on the grip of his pistol. "You the rancher?" he called. Elias nodded. "You got Apaches on your land. I know. You harboring them?" "I'm letting them live." The man spit into the dirt. "We've had reports. Raiders. Families burned. We found what was left." "So did I," Elias said. One of the other riders stepped forward. "These people here?" "No," Elias said. "They're the ones who got burned." There was a long silence. The mustached man looked past Elias toward the tents. Children peeked out from behind canvas. Women paused in their chores. Warriors stood without reaching for weapons, but their muscles were ready. Tiza appeared from between the posts of the porch, his face unreadable. "You vouch for them?" the rider asked. "I do. You know what that means." Elias took a step forward. "I know exactly what that means." The mustached man looked him up and down. Elias saw the choice form in his eyes, the one between drawing and walking away. The wind returned, faint and high. "You're lucky we ain't here to start anything," the man said finally. "But others will come. They won't ask questions." "Let them come," Elias said. "We'll still be here." The riders mounted and turned. No goodbyes, just dust. That night, the fire circle burned higher. The tribe gathered closer. Taza spoke of ancestors and the rhythm of the land, of wolves that protect the weakest cubs, of rivers that remember every step taken across their surface. Elias sat near Naline, the blanket across his shoulders. She looked up at him. "You are not one of us," she said, "but the land has decided." "I'm too old to argue with land," he replied. She smiled. Not wide, not long, but it was there. In the days that followed, the ranch changed again. The fences were rebuilt, not to keep things out, but to mark space that belonged to all who respected it. A smokehouse was built beside the barn. Seeds were planted where nothing had ever grown. Naline taught the younger ones to listen for rattlesnakes. Elias taught them to oil a hinge so the wind wouldn't steal the door from its frame. More came, quietly, not in war paint, not in force. Survivors, wanderers, families with stories etched into their skin. They arrived like wind, sometimes just one, sometimes whole clusters. They asked for nothing, but when Elias opened the gate, they stayed, and the porch, once the loneliest place on earth, became a place of counsel. At night, Elias would sit with Taza, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking of how many stars the sky could hold before the dawn came and washed them away. They didn't always understand each other's words, but they always understood the meaning behind them. One evening, Naline returned from the hills with a bundle of berries and a small carved stone. She handed the stone to Elias. It was shaped like a bird. Its wings were spread, its eyes small and precise. "For you," she said. He held it in his palm, feeling its weight. "Did you carve this?" "My brother did. He died." Elias looked at her. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. "I'll keep it safe," he said. Later, he placed it beside the photo of Mary and Clara. When the first snow came early, the windmill froze in the night, and the next morning, the children laughed and tried to catch flakes on their tongues. Elias watched from the porch, a wool blanket around his shoulders, a mug of coffee in his hands. Naline stood beside him, older now, quieter. "They are not afraid anymore," she said. "Neither am I." They stood there together, the cold curling around their ankles. the laughter rising through the white sky. The land, once cracked and bitter, had found something it hadn't known in a long time. A heartbeat. In a land carved by silence and hardened by dust, one man's simple act of compassion became the bridge between two worlds long divided. From bloodshed to understanding, from fear to fellowship, Elias McGraw's choice to offer water to a dying girl became the seed of peace that took root in barren soil. Sometimes it's not grand gestures that change history, just quiet courage and the willingness to see a human soul where others only see an enemy. If stories like this move your heart, tales of grit, redemption, and the unexpected bonds forged in the Wild West, then saddle up and hit that subscribe button. Here on Wild West Love Chronicles, we bring you powerful frontier stories filled with emotion, humanity, and hope. Don't miss a single tale. Subscribe now and ride with us into the heart of the untamed West.